Hello, I'm Jackie Lucky, your financial planning maestro. This series of podcasts is aimed at financial planning professionals and also those who are looking to enter the financial planning profession. We will be talking during the podcast about all things Certified Financial Planner certification related, talking to other CFPs around the world, and also we will be dropping in on some new entrants who've just entered the financial planning profession, and we'll be checking up along the way on a regular basis with them to see how they're getting on. I hope you enjoy today's podcast. Hello, I'm Jackie Lucky, your financial planning maestro. Welcome to today's podcast. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest and recently has gained her Certified Financial Planner designation in the UK, and that is Lara Gentles from Santander Private Banking. Hello, Lara.
Hi there.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Thanks for joining me today. I've got lots and lots of questions to ask you, so we're going to dive straight in, if I may.
Let's go for it.
Okay. So, before we get on to your journey, through the Certified Financial Planner and through the CISI L7 case study assessment, let's zoom back to the very beginning and tell us a little bit about how you got into the financial planning profession.
So I have now been in the industry for around about just coming up 25 years. But I started my career, and I still work in a bank, but I started in sort of traditional banking roles and worked my way into relationship management. And then from being a private banking relationship manager, it always used to frustrate me that I would nurture a relationship. But then when it came to the longer term planning or investment management, I was having to hand that relationship off. So that's when I decided that I wanted to put myself through what was in those days the financial planning certificate and actually look to be able to provide that fuller relationship and the full planning model. So that's how I got into financial planning.
Hey, excellent. And so how did you hold lots of different roles as you were going through that process? Did you do, initially more behind the scenes or?
Yeah, so initially when I started in banking, it was in mortgage processing and underwriting, and sort of worked into people management on that side of things, but then shifted into managing customers and relationship management roles, first in business banking, and then I moved into the high net worth sector looking after private banking customers. And since then, I've largely stayed in that kind of segment, moving into wealth management and wealth investment management with a high net worth customer base. I spent a short time with an IFA, but I felt like with that firm, the culture wasn't really right for me. And I think by that stage of my career, I'd found my niche within wealth management and looking after those high net worth customers.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it takes all sorts to do different roles, doesn't it? But I think particularly in small firms, you've got to be really careful that you've got the right culture there, because it can have a devastating effect on, not only your own mental well-being, but obviously the service that you can give your clients.
That's it. And as I said, behind the scenes, you've got to have personal relationships with who you're working with alongside the clients as well. And it's just, everything's got to fit into place nicely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So what was one of the, what was the best bit about moving into that client relationship role? Because I know that you're a very hardworking people person, aren't you?
Yeah, well, that's it. That's the part that I love. As I used to joke that I'd say, this role is fantastic because essentially I'm paid to chat. That's brilliant. When you take the technical aspect out of that, is essentially what our job is. And it's fantastic. And I love the fact that we're really helping clients generationally as well. So we're looking very much long-term into the future and starting to think about the next generation coming up. And it's quite nice when there's a handover and you start to look after the children and the grandchildren as well, and manage their finances as well for them. It's quite satisfying to kind of see that relationship through.
And that's a really interesting dynamic, isn't it? Because I know that certainly research in the States indicates that about 60% of financial advisors and planners are actually dumped by clients when the money cascades down to new generations. But you haven't found that with your relationships.
Well, sometimes it does happen, and I think it will just depend on what I tend to find is the relationship with the parents and how open they are with their children. Every family dynamic is very different, but if you have got that dynamic where families get to the point that possibly they're estate planning or they want to be open and honest about what the next steps are going to be, I would always encourage them to introduce the children at some point, even if it is just a coffee. And by the way, when the time comes, this is the financial planner or this is the bank. And through time you will develop the trust with that generation, and it may be that they have different needs because they're maybe more digital and maybe more able to do things themselves, and you'll handhold them in different ways, but it's just quite nice to try and nurture that relationship as well where possible. But admittedly you don't get it 100% of the time.
No. Well, and you never know, different people, different generations have different priorities, and depending on when they inherit the money, they might want to go off and do some things with it initially, mightn't they?
Exactly.
Before, in later years, they might come back to you too. Yeah.
And also sometimes there are parents who say, we're going to spend it all, quite rightly.
Yeah, sounds like my parents, actually.
Good on them.
So tell us a little bit about how you came across the Certified Financial Planner license and why you decided to embark on that process.
So I first heard about this. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, it may have been as long as sort of 8-10 years ago when the CISI first took over the financial planning side of things. And at that point, we'd come through RDR, I was level 6 qualified, and I quite enjoyed doing exams at that point. And I looked into it then, but now I'm glad I didn't approach it at that point because I just don't think I would have been ready for it. And I think if I'd failed spectacularly then, I don't think I would have sort of looked at it and gone for it again. So I'm glad I have left it until now, till this stage in my career, to do it because I just feel that I'm sort of more well-rounded. But then that's one of the reasons that I wanted to do it as well. As I've said, that I've largely look after a very specific client base of high net worth customers. And I felt that this would be a really great way of testing whether I am a good, well-rounded financial planner. So that was something I was quite keen to do, and make sure that it was testing my skills for all different types of clients.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? And yes, you're bang on. It was about 8 years ago, so 2015, when the CISI merged with the Institute of Financial Planning and the CFP came across. So because you already have, I think, the private client investment module, don't you, exam with the CISI. So already very familiar with the CISI and their exams.
Yeah, done quite a few with CISI now, and quite familiar with those type of exams and quite like it as an institute. Yeah.
So tell us, let's get into the nitty-gritty of your assessment process then. So did you sit the level 6 exam?
I did, yes. And then they just changed it shortly after I sat it. So I sat the exam, and if I'm being honest, the exam I don't think was overly difficult compared to some of the other exams I've done in the past. What I did find challenging was a lot of the terminology was very different to what I'd been used to seeing or what we're possibly used to here in the UK. So that was probably the main thing to get your head around, the way the questions were written or some of the terminology. But thankfully I managed to pass the exam first time, which meant I could then go straight into the case study.
Right. And what sort of terminology was it that they were using that threw you?
I'm not sure if it was just the workbook. I mean, if anyone that's familiar with CII or the CISI investment exams, I just felt when moving into CFP, I don't know if it was more Americanized or it just felt different. I just felt that the way things were put forward just wasn't as familiar as perhaps we'd been used to seeing things laid out with other exams that we'd done in the past.
Yes, I think it is a slightly different methodology to it, which kind of turns a few things that you might be more familiar with, like on the investment advice side. There are, I think, in the financial planning world, there are naturally conversations that you're probably already having that come before that are they need to be evidenced, don't they, in this level 7 case study before you
That's
even
it.
get to the advice that you're giving.
Yeah. But in saying that, as I said, I got through the exam, passed it first time. So it was just if I was to think of anything that was a challenge, it was just getting your head around things are positioned slightly different than perhaps you'd been used to if you'd gone down the CII route.
Yeah. And one of the things that I get quite a few questions with people who've gone down the CII route, then switching across to the level 6 exam, is that there's no negative marking, so you can't, in the CISI exam for the level 6, you can't write the right answer and the wrong answer and get 100%, because the other answers that follow are impacted by the answer that you gave previously. So you can't give two answers, if you like. And sometimes that takes a little bit of getting used to, of trying to get your head around that actually they're looking for, a specific answer from a financial planning point of view, how you would approach it, more kind of client orientated, if you like, rather than blobs of knowledge, I call them, that you get with the CII.
Yeah, and I've always felt as well that the CISI as an organisation, they prefer things to be written grammatically correct, more so than the CII are quite happy with sort of bullet point note form, even in the written exams. I feel that I've always felt you had to write a little bit more with a CISI exam.
Yeah,
that may have, that's just how I felt.
Demonstrate it, and I think this is part of it, is demonstrating the application of knowledge, which essentially is what the certified financial planner is. So I think then naturally, yes, you're right, you are writing more to demonstrate that not only do you know the knowledge, but actually you're applying it in that particular case study or scenario.
Yeah, definitely.
So, right, so then you move swiftly on to the level 7 case study.
Yes, and I chickened out, actually. I decided, because I think I got my results of the exam, I think it was the September exam, and I decided not to go straight into it over Christmas. So I took the 3 months out and took a break, and then started again. I think it was round about springtime, because I thought, well, that's fine, and I'll be finished for the summer. That's what I thought anyway.
Famous last words.
Best laid plans. So then I embarked on the case study. Thankfully, though, I felt like I was going into the case study really well prepared, because I had been on a couple of group Zoom calls that you had kindly done to just give an insight on what was ahead. And I'd also sort of listened to a few of the podcasts of people who had gone through the process before. So I'd managed my own expectations going into that. And I think I went into the case study thinking, I'm not going to put too much pressure on myself. I'm going to go into this thinking I'm probably not going to pass first time, but that's okay. I've got 3 shots at this. Let's just see how well I do in the first attempt, and we'll take it from there. So I think that was good that I wasn't overly stressing myself out.
Yes. And I think one of the other guys who I interviewed a while ago now, he said that one of the best points of advice he could give anybody is to leave your own ego at the door. To get yourself prepared, but actually don't put that kind of pressure on yourself that, you're going to pass on your first submission. Because like you say, you've got 3 submissions and nobody knows, cares, is bothered whether you pass on your first submission or your third submission or anything in between.
Yeah, and actually it's fading now, because I've passed and I've kind of put it to the back of my mind. But definitely whilst I was in that zone, it's by far the most challenging exam I have ever done. That case study. So it definitely will test your knowledge in all sorts of ways. Test your patience as well.
Absolutely, yes. It's a part stamina test as well, isn't it, really?
Definitely. And I think a lot of that, for me, the most challenging part was definitely the spreadsheets and building those cash flow models from scratch. I mean, I knew I had some brushing up to do on Excel. By how much I just didn't, I didn't appreciate just how much I had to do. And I think that's what I underestimated is just how detailed those spreadsheets really were going to be and how long that would take.
Yeah. But I think, is it fair to say that once you crack the spreadsheets, then, particularly that retirement planning one, which is the real mountain, isn't it? But after that, it kind of starts to accelerate the whole process, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I think once you've got it done, it's life-changing, because you can you can change things around and play around with it. Once it's built, it's fantastic. But it's getting to that point. And I think probably the mistake I made as well is I thought, let's get ahead of myself. I'll try and come to solutions and sort of have a sort of base report of what I'm going to do with this case study. And I did that before I started the cash flow model and the spreadsheets. And actually, you soon realise that the money runs out a lot quicker than you had anticipated. So you really need to build that cash flow model before you start messing around with solutions and things like that.
And, it's one of the things that I always say is let the numbers do the talking, let your spreadsheets do the talking first. Because once you know where the problems are, it's easy to find out what the solutions are going to be. And then the whole job of writing all of the text that goes with it makes it even easier, doesn't it? Because you can you've got the whole thing laid out in front of you.
Definitely. And I think you had actually said that to me, is it's once you've got everything in front of you in numbers, all you're really doing is writing up that information and explaining what's in front of you on the spreadsheets. And that was the case. Once you get over that hurdle, the writing up of the report really didn't take very long at all. So that it was, as I said, I said it was really an exam to test your Excel skills. Well, for me anyway.
Yes, it is for quite a few people, I think, Lara. You're not alone in that one.
But I got there, so that's great.
Yeah. And how many hours did it take you, do you think, roughly, to get through that first submission? Was that where the bulk of the time was spent?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I kind of thought back on this, and I think I started really trying to keep in line with your suggested timeline. So I started doing that, and I thought that I was doing really well until I got to the spreadsheets, and then I was falling behind. So I think on average, I probably was doing, say, 10 to 15 hours a week, but that wasn't every single week. As I said, when I was in the thick of the spreadsheets, I would say the bulk of it was during that time. I have a memory of being in the house alone. I remember it being a Friday night and just looking up, bearing in mind this was the summer, and just the house was in darkness other than the glow of my laptop at breaking point from being in these spreadsheets, because I just didn't want to leave it at any one point.
No. And I think you've got to pace yourself, but also every time you leave it, like you say, you've got to leave it at a point where you can go back and say, right, I know exactly where I was. You can't kind of leave it mid spreadsheet build, can you?
Yeah, definitely.
Makes it
but
a bit
it's so
tricky.
Satisfying once it's built and all up and running. It really is.
Yes, and like you say, really easy to alter and tweak along the way once you've got the crux of it built.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, excellent. So you sent in your first submission, and then what happened?
So first submission went in, and I remember you telling me that you're going to get the results back, and you'll probably be shouting at the screen when you see what the results are if you've not passed, and shouting at the feedback. So just take a step back and then come back in a few days and then look at it with different eyes. So I went to open my results very much with that in mind, and actually the opposite happened. I thought I was going to really flunk this, but I ended up getting 72% on my first submission. However, two of my sections I got 50% and one was 47%, which meant I'd failed overall. But I felt like I'd passed, so I was elated. And then I did what you told me, I put it away, and then I came back about a week later in a bad mood. And at that point saying, oh my goodness, I could have actually passed this. This is ridiculous. So as I said, then we went into second submission and thankfully got it over the line a second time. And without really having to do too much, actually. All I really had to change was I had forgotten one of my expenditure appendices. So I really just had to add that in. And there was a couple of little extra paragraphs that I had to pop in. But other than that, there wasn't too much to change.
No, well, that's fantastic and well done. And congratulations on passing.
Thank you.
Amazing feat to come so close. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I certainly, was it your case study where the feedback said that if the individuals had read through their plan and marked it, they probably would have passed?
Oh, I can't remember.
Because I kind of vaguely remember, Lara, that you said that the feedback said, so before you submitted your first submission, did you sit down and mark it against the assessment criteria?
I did, but we all say that we did. You all, it's whether you did it to the degree that is required. So I very much went through, but I think I will be honest. By that point, you just want it off your desk and gone.
Yes, given up the will to live.
Yeah, I think at that point, I really thought I was going to flunk it. So I think at that point, I just wanted to get it in. And then, because of the feedback, one thing I will say about this exam is you get really great detailed feedback. So I think at that point I'd said, let's just get this in. Let's see what the feedback is. And then that will give me something to work through, because I was conscious of, I didn't want to just add things in for the sake of it, and start waffling with paragraphs that could end up sort of mucking up other things further down the line. So exactly. Yeah. And I wanted to make sure that the report was quite concise. So yes, I did go through it and I did self-mark it, but obviously not to the degree that was required, because it was a few silly things that were there that I could have picked up marks on.
Yeah. And I think that's always the way, but I think it's a very common scenario when you get to the end of the financial plan, particularly get into the estate planning section, the final bit that we do, and you just kind of think, oh, I've had enough now. I just need to press the go button, even though I haven't really finished it.
Yeah, I was just delighted to actually get finished. Because one of the other things that the suggested flow of the case study document, I just felt was wrong. It didn't read well from a client point of view. So again, I was trying to write this so that it flowed and read well, as if it was a client picking it up and reading it. So I had to try and fit that in, but in a way that was still going to be easy to mark. For the assessor. Yeah.
And so after going through the process, how many hours in total? Do you have a rough feel for how many hours in total it took you to pass the whole shebang?
The whole thing, I would say easily the 200 hours that is recommended.
Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah. It's a fair
as I said, because the second submission, I was only really an extra few hours, because it was an appendix that I pretty much forgot to put in and was already there in my notes. So so easily 150 hours for the first submission, and then an extra 5 to 10 for the second submission.
Yeah. And that's testament to all of the hard work that you put in that first submission. Because I say, don't we, as we're going through the course, what I want you to do is maximum effort on the first submission. So the second submission, if you don't get through on the first, the second submission becomes, a walk in the park, which is exactly what happened to you, wasn't it?
Yeah. But I could not have done it without the training course.
Without
sounding too much like a paid advert, I couldn't have done it without help.
No, and I think that lots of people valued the one-to-ones in the course, as well as having that structure, the help with the Excel spreadsheets. When you start going round and round in circle, being able to bounce some ideas off somebody, it just kind of stops you going in a tailspin, I think, from time to time, doesn't it?
Yeah, but actually, thankfully for me, I had 2 one-to-ones with the course that I had booked, and I didn't actually need both of them, because I felt that actually the course content was so good and so detailed that I thought, actually, I don't need to use both of these one-to-ones, which was great, because I had a second one for the reset.
Yes.
So that was fantastic as well.
Yeah, great. Good. Well, I'm glad that overall it was a relatively pleasant experience. So looking back now, do you think that going through that level 7 case study assessment, has it changed you as a financial planner, the way it helps your clients or the way you look at things differently?
I think what it has done is served as a reminder to pull us back to do things. Just take time, really. I think sometimes in this industry, we're in such a rush to get to the outcome with our clients, that perhaps we start going into products perhaps a bit too early. So one of the things I thought was great about this case study is it really does take you back to the basics of, how to build a case study for a client without going into that. That was the next step after the case study.
Yeah.
So it really was all about understanding the client's needs and really looking very long term at making sure that what they've got and building all those needs into play and making sure that they're going to work. And if they're not going to work, you've got alternatives to talk through with them. So it was very good. Just as I said, to bring you back to basics as a reminder of what we should be doing for our clients.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm glad that it's been, positive experience, a positive outcome for you. So let's talk about, the financial planning profession at large. And, we've both been in this profession quite well. Not that, we look younger than we are.
Of course.
So in your experience of your time in the profession, how do you think it's changed from a female perspective?
Well, do you know, it's interesting because don't get me wrong, I have been in sort of regional seminars and conferences and looked around the room and thought, God, there's only a handful of women here. However, I feel I've been really fortunate because throughout my career, starting from day one in banking, I've had really strong female leaders who have really encouraged other females to get on in their career and really acted as good mentors. So I feel really lucky in that regard. And even now, in the role that I'm in just now, we've got some really good progressive male leaders in place who really recognise the value of having balanced teams. But I do appreciate that that's not every organisation, that's not every firm. And there definitely should be a lot more encouragement to try and bring more women into the industry.
Yeah. And have you had conversations with women who've thought twice about staying in the profession at all? Or, obviously with your experience with a much more supportive background than some other women have experienced, maybe you haven't come across, that kind of conversation.
Yeah, and I think sometimes what it comes down to is perhaps like a bit like what I was saying earlier, is if you don't have the right culture or you don't feel that you're the right fit in an organisation, if that happens early in a career, you may actually be mistaken for thinking it's the career that's not right for you, rather than just the underlying employer or firm that you're with. I think obviously historically it has been a male-dominated workplace. The financial planning profession has been very male dominated.
Yeah.
And I think it's nice to see that there are women coming through, but there are still some of those firms where they may be male dominant. And I think perhaps they have to look inward at saying, well, what can we do to try and make this more welcoming, that if we are recruiting, that women want to come and work with us? Because it's certainly something I have done over my career. If I'm thinking about going somewhere, I will ask, where are all the women, and are they in senior positions? It's definitely something that I want to make sure that I will fit in an organisation and be working with like-minded people.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you came across women who are interested in joining the profession now, what would be your message to them?
I would tell them to absolutely go for it, because as I said earlier, you're paid to chat and jest, but it does play, the profession does really play to our natural strengths as women. Do you know, we're very good listeners, and we find it quite easy to empathise with people. These are all skills that are required because there's a lot of trust involved in the financial planning profession. Yeah. And I do think it's something that we kind of downplay, and we focus a lot on the technical skills, but actually there is that sort of wider rounded role that comes into force as well, and it is something that's in demand and is a career for life, do you know, that you can do very well. So I would definitely encourage others to come into the profession if they're thinking about it.
And I think it's not, it's got so many facets to it, hasn't it? That if you think, you're a great people person and you want to be client facing, then there's roles for you. But, if perhaps, you're a bit more introverted or you're a bit more of a techie, then, there are plenty of roles available for, power planners and so forth as well, aren't there?
Definitely. There's so many roles that you can move into, and sometimes it's a bit of trial and error. And I know, as I said, when I was coming into the profession, there wasn't such a thing as apprenticeships, so there wasn't so much work done for school leavers. So it's nice to see that those type of things are coming into force as well, to encourage people to come in at a younger age.
Yeah, And learning about money at a young age is really important anyway, isn't it? So
definitely, yeah.
Getting kids interested, and maybe that will help light that fire and drive them to join the profession in the years to come.
Exactly. And as I said, it doesn't matter where you are in the UK. It's something that is required by all individuals. So it could be a job for life. So it's definitely a good profession to go into.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely agree with all of that. So let's just bring it back to the CFP. Final couple of questions, Lara.
Okay.
If what advice would you give to people starting their journey or thinking about becoming a certified financial planner?
I would say, first of all, is don't try and rush the process, and go into it really with an open mind. As I said earlier, you get 3 goes at the case study. So don't set yourself up that you've got to pass first time, because sometimes we put too much pressure on ourselves with technical exams that's what we need to do. The case study is a different ballgame. So as I said, I would just take your time and maybe say this is going to be an 18-month process from start to finish if you're doing the exam and the case study.
Yeah.
Also for me, get help. It was invaluable to me to have the course to help me along and have that timeline. Just because even if you know somebody else that's going through the process at the same time, it's likely they'll have a different case study. So you don't really have study buddies. And even if somebody did have the same case study as you probably wouldn't want to compare notes too much, because you might drive, just drive yourself down the wrong route, and end up sort of feeling worse than you would have in the first place. Although some people do very well and pass first time. So I would definitely say get help. There's lots of different courses out there. I found yours invaluable and I could not have done it without you. But there are some that are more specific to people who have lots of knowledge of Excel already and can kind of cram things in a couple of days.
Yeah.
And I think if you are going down your course, trust the process, and don't run before you can walk, because you've been through this a number of times now. So when you say, don't try and write up the report and come to any solutions until you've done your spreadsheets, there's a reason for that, as I found out.
Yes.
Because I had to unwind everything back when I thought I was getting ahead of myself. So really just trust the process.
Fantastic. Lara, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. Thanks very much for sharing your journey to Certified Financial Planner, to your designation, and congratulations again on passing.
Thank you. No problem. It's been a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. It's really interesting, isn't it, to listen to other people's points of view about different things, all relating to our wonderful financial planning profession. If you know anyone who might be interested in listening to any of these podcasts, please pass on our details to them. So that's it from me. Join me again next time when we'll be talking all things Certified Financial Planner related, and also dropping in on our new entrants to the financial planning profession. Bye for now.